The leader of Russia will be sending to the leader of Belarus.
Japan is extending a state of emergency in Tokyo and several other areas for another 3 weeks, just a month before the Olympics, as hospitals there remain overwhelmed with serious COVID cases. Alex Capstick attended a news conference by the president of Japan's organising committee.
The opinion polls there have regularly shown that at least 60% up to 80% of the population want the Games either cancelled outright or postponed until next year or further into the future because of the pandemic. But it will look very, very different. We still don't know whether there are going to be any crowds. International fans have been banned. A decision on domestic fans will be made next month, although the tone from Ms. Hashimoto during her press briefing was that might be doubtful that there'll be any fans at all.
World News from the BBC. The UN says as many as 400,000 people have fled the city of Goma in eastern Congo over fears of another eruption from Mount Nyiragongo. A BBC reporter in Goma says the city looks like a ghost town. Sake, 20 kilometres away, is full of displaced people. Others are moving into neighbouring Rwanda, the Virunga National Park, and even across Lake Kivu. Aid agencies are trying to provide food, shelter, water and sanitation. Revised figures show that, contrary to expectations, the French economy fell into recession in the first quarter of the year. Here's Andrew Walker.
Figures already released had shown that the economy of the Eurozone as a whole had contracted in the two most recent quarters, which constitutes a recession as the term is often defined. France initially appeared to have avoided that, but it transpires that the first estimate of construction activity was too upbeat. Although the sector did grow according to the new figures, it was a more subdued performance than the French statistical agency initially thought. Declines in service industries, which are particularly affected by pandemic-related restrictions on social contact, and manufacturing meant that the economy as a whole contracted.
One of the co-founders of the Black Lives Matter movement in America is stepping down as executive director of its foundation. Patrisse Cullors said her resignation had been planned for some time and wasn't due to recent allegations that she misused donations to buy property. She has dismissed the allegations as right-wing attempts to discredit her. President Erdogan is inaugurating a giant mosque in Taksim Square in Istanbul, a public space traditionally seen as a symbol of the secular Turkish Republic. The ceremony takes place on the anniversary of mass demonstrations against Mr. Erdogan's government in 2013, which began in Taksim Square and spread across Turkey. The complex has capacity for more than 2,000 worshippers. BBC News.
天天在一起 天天用心听，听见台北的声音 FM 93.1，幸福永远属于你。
公民总主笔，
方恩格时间。
谁当家？
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 你当家？
谁当家？谁当家？
谁当家？
当家？我当家？你当家？我当家？
我当家？
到底谁当家？你来当家。
Welcome to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. I'm your host, Ross Darrell Feingold. Today our guest is technology industry expert, blockchain and digital assets expert, and resident of Taipei, Sam Reynolds. Sam, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Ross. Thank you.
Before we talk about technology and working from home,
Yes.
COVID-19 and all that kind of bad stuff, tell us a bit about yourself, where you're from originally.
Sure, I'm from Vancouver. I'm here in Taipei for a company called Blockworks, which is my hat right there. And I'm here covering the very exciting sector for blockchain and Bitcoin and all that fun digital asset stuff around Asia. So mostly that has me focused on Singapore and Hong Kong, which are the hubs of finance here. But increasingly, we're looking at Taiwan and some of the startups in this country and in the space.
When you were growing up in Vancouver, since there are a lot of people from Taiwan have ties to Vancouver, did you know a lot about Taiwan, or it was more like you came here and then you realized, wow, a lot of people here have ties to Vancouver?
Well, that's a great question, actually. So before I got with Blockworks, I was actually covering the PC sector, right? So reviewing laptops and notebooks from Asus, Acer, you know, they're all based here in Taipei. So I was aware of Taiwan because it's the capital, more or less, of computing for the world. And also, in Vancouver, there are lots of people who have the background from Taiwan and live in Vancouver as well.
I know you went back to Vancouver earlier this year for a visit. When you visit home, or where you grew up in Vancouver, you see a lot of people from China and a lot of people from Hong Kong,
right?
And some people from Taiwan. But which one has the greater influence there now?
Well, obviously with China's rise, people from mainland China are the dominant group in the city. But there is still a very present Taiwanese and Hong Kong diaspora. So if you look back at history, actually, the Cantonese from Hong Kong came first. And as Taiwan rose in the 70s, they followed as well. Right, so there is still a strong historical base of diaspora there from those places, but actually, fast forward to these days, and it's mostly mainland Chinese.
So if we were having this conversation a few years in the future, you think Taiwanese will still be moving to the Vancouver area, or they're going to look for somewhere else in Canada?
Well, that's a good question, right? So I do think that there is that appeal of Vancouver. After all, it is a port city, right, on the west coast, and they do have a large population there. So I think just because they have that historical tie to Vancouver, they still will go there regardless of how demographics shift.
Speaking of shifting,
yes,
we've shifted to working from home here in Taipei, but that's not new. The rest of the world has been doing that for about 17 or 18 months. And you also mentioned your experience reviewing computers, and so you know a lot about the equipment that people need to work from home. But give us an overview of working from home Taipei style. So not what people do in other places, but just based on recent days' experience and talking with people. What's Taipei style work from home?
Well, it's not new for me after all, right? I've worked from home here for most of my time here after all, right? So some key things you want to look for when you work from home is your monitor. Make sure that it is, a great display, right? It's at eye level. And B, your chair, because your posture matters a lot. If you'll be on your computer for 7 to 8 hours a day, making sure you have a proper chair that promotes good posture and good, spine health is so key, right? As well as having supports for your wrists, for your keyboard and mouse too, right? Because obviously your posture makes a lot of sense, and you can really prevent lots of wrist strain and good posture by having those pads right there.
What are some things though that might be uniquely challenging to working from home?
Well,
Taipei, Sam, what if you're on a conference call at 6 p.m. Taipei time with an important client, and then the garbage truck starts singing outside or something like that? So what are the unique challenges?
Yeah, so definitely the space, right? So in Taiwan, people have households with their grandparents, with their relatives. They don't move out as often as you do in the West. So that's a key challenge. As far as the garbage truck goes, actually, so during my big conference call I have with my U.S. counterparts, it's at around 9 o'clock our time, 9 a.m. Eastern time in the U.S., and around 9:20, we hear that jingle, right? So it's actually a joke amongst them. Okay, time to wrap things up. I hear the truck coming through. So it's
they know you need to go downstairs and run after the garbage truck.
Not me personally, but it's a good marker of time, right? So it's all in good fun.
So you turn it into a positive. What are some other things that maybe besides the monitor and the posture?
Yes.
And I don't know, maybe telling your family members to go away because you're on an important call.
Right.
But what are there some things for you personally that make work from home go well?
Well, also then your climate in your apartment, right? So right now it's quite hot in Taiwan. Actually, it's quite warm for this month. And if you do have a very hot apartment, you won't be very comfortable. At the same time, you don't want your AC running all day, all night, as your power bill will be quite horrendous. So the key thing is to ensure that you're comfortable without having your AC on. So that means things like having your windows open, fans on, that kind of stuff, being well hydrated. All the important things there.
I thought you were going to say something like have buckets of ice to put your hands or your feet in.
Not quite, not quite.
What about background noise other than the singing garbage trucks? What do you do to control that?
Well, personally, I actually have some very nice headphones with noise canceling features. So they will drone out things like scooter sounds, background noise. In fact, my neighbors for the last month were doing very extensive renovations on their apartments. Right, so I heard for hours on end, but thankfully these headphones cut that out.
And when you're working from home, what do you do for meals, or what would you recommend to people for meals, especially considering now the limitations? Because Up until a few days ago, maybe you could work from home, but you still could go out and sit in the restaurant or the coffee place just to take a break. But now that's out as well because it's only done. So what do you recommend for meals?
The temptation, of course, is Uber Eats or Food Panda, right? But you have a few problems. First of all, the cost adds up. Secondly, fast food is not good for your health, obviously. So personally, I will always cook from home, a simple sandwich or some noodles. Afterwards, go for a walk outside. I know that maybe you can't eat outside. It's up for debate. We'll see about that. But definitely having breaks throughout the day, going outside, going for a walk, wearing the mask, of course, right? It's all good to have that routine.
Well, let's look at it from the employer perspective. We were talking about us as individuals working from home, but also based on your observations within the past few weeks and comparing with what's been going on around the world over the past year and a half, what do employers in Taipei need to do to facilitate working from home for people here in Taipei?
So the big thing is trying to shift away from having your work based upon your hours versus your output. So, in the West right now with work from home, it doesn't matter what you do at work, it matters when it's done. So here, you have to clock in at 9 o'clock, clock out at 5 o'clock, right? Whereas in the West, you have to have this done by, the 21st, 22nd, whatever it is. So the big shift for employers here is to realize that time spent in the office is not important, right? Rather than what's being done, right? So being productive is the most important part.
Do you think employers in Taipei can make that shift?
Well, I think they should, but unfortunately I've seen in the last few weeks it's not the case, right? I see many people who work for, ironically, tech companies struggling from work from home because they have to clock in, clock out, where the important thing should be, what do you actually do and what's getting done?
Shouldn't that be easier, though? And we don't want to criticize the tech industry per se, but you're talking about the back office, right? The support staff, right? The salespeople, people look at the financials. You're not talking about the people on the production line. So why is it difficult for the supervisors, the managers to understand that the staff will get the work done, but they don't need to clock in at 9 a.m. and clock out at 5 p.m. when they're working from home?
Well, the first thing, obviously, with manufacturing, right? That is an essential service, business. That will remain open throughout even level 4, I presume. In the US, it was definitely, right? But I think the problem with the tech sector here, and other businesses too, is that their mentality is so far behind what makes a good company and what makes a company productive. For instance, again, with these tech companies, right, they are on the cutting edge of products and research, but as far as their HR goes, it is far behind. So I've got friends working for, I won't say who, but we can all guess who, and they are struggling because their IT systems, ironically, are so backwards and so archaic that it's a big struggle to work from home.
Which brings up the question of what kind of opportunities are there still for Taiwan companies helping people work from home, not whether here or abroad? Because there was a lot of buying in 2020. People were working from home around the world. It was very good for Taiwan tech companies. What's still the room for growth in that space, though? So as people continue to work from home, or large numbers work from home globally, still in the near future until vaccination rates improve and the COVID situation improves, what else are people still going to be buying for their work from home space?
Well, definitely things like good chairs, good monitors.
Are you saying they wore out the chair they bought last year?
They might, or it could be a cheap chair, right? So here's the thing. If you cheap out on a chair, you pay for that later with back pains, neck pain, so on and so forth, right? So I think that's the first key thing. Secondly, for your display, having some kind of mount on that. So it is eye level and not down there, because one of the big strain points on your neck is making yourself bend like this down all day. So that is quite difficult for people, obviously, right? So for companies here in manufacturing, just supports like that, so mounts, good chairs, and of course things like keyboards too. But I think on the software side, there is room to build out tools for this, right? We know about Slack, which is a worldwide platform for collaboration amongst teams who are abroad, working from home. But I think firms here can make their own version of that, have it localized for this market here.
So for a lot of the things that people did buy last year, again, globally, like the monitors, and you mentioned the keyboards, and people bought maybe new laptops or desktops. When is that going to wear out if they're working from home so much?
Yeah, so usually, as far as things wearing out, right, you have about a 2 to 4 year cycle. So with the move in the West to work from home and school from home, we saw a massive uptick in sales of PCs, right? So obviously, firms plan for a 2-year refresh rate. So last year rather, was not supposed to be a big refresh rate year, right? Because there's not really new chips, right? There's nothing new in that sector. But given the fact that all these kids had to do, class from home and their parents were also at home, people bought PCs, laptops, monitors, all that good stuff.
And you did cover that industry
yes,
in your career. So where does Taiwan stand versus its competitors? Is Taiwan still really the place for laptops and similar devices, or is Korea a good competitor? Is China going to be increasingly the competitor, or other places in Asia?
For global brands, it's really just Taiwan, right? So yes, Korea has Samsung, but Samsung has focused more on the electronics like phones and tablets and TVs versus PCs and notebooks, that kind of stuff. So in Taiwan's case, there really just is Taiwan. It's home to everyone from Acer, Asus, MSI, so on and so forth. China, they do have their own domestic companies, but they're so focused internally, right? Lenovo, for instance, is a big Chinese brand, and they bought IBM's ThinkPad division, right? They've gone to great lengths actually to make themselves more Americanized, right? Because of this mistrust of that brand from China. So for things like notebooks and servers, they make a lot of them actually in the US because of that brand awareness. That being said, though, all those components are largely sourced still from Taiwan. So you might see a Samsung logo on something or Lenovo, but those parts inside are still Taiwanese.
And you've also covered the gaming industry. Now, some people like me are a bit old and boring.
I wouldn't say that.
I said, Sam, I don't know anything about the gaming industry, and I don't know what it means for the economies or the tech manufacturers, whether in Taiwan or Korea or increasingly maybe India. How do you explain the importance of the gaming industry from an economy perspective or the manufacturing perspective, and not from the perspective of the individuals who enjoy playing games?
Well, definitely. So for the first part, actually, it's a huge driver of PC sales, right? So if you want to play the latest games and have them look the best, you need that new graphics card, new processor, new PC, new monitor, right? So all these companies here have exposure there because they have to produce the latest technology so games perform their best. Secondly, there's actually now a growing sector of domestically made games for this audience here. They're mostly on mobile, right? So you do have that scene growing. But with those games, they usually are free, right? You don't have to buy them. But in the game, you have chances to buy things like new armor, new weapons, all that stuff. So you have an ancillary service of payments. So lots of companies here, in Taiwan, they support the payments aspect of these games. And that extends all across Southeast Asia, because if you're in, say, Thailand or the Philippines, you might not have the latest PC to play games there, but you do have a smartphone. And you do actually buy stuff in that game, and there's a good chance it might come through a Taiwanese company.
So for parents whose children love to play games, there's an important economic and job opportunity in the future for those children, right? Parents shouldn't restrict the amount of gaming.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say that, right? In order to get jobs at those companies, you have to go to a good school. So obviously, bookwork's required. But the point is, it is a massive industry, right? I believe that revenue from gaming has surpassed Hollywood. So there's an important part there, right? Well, secondly, also, during the COVID crisis in the US, Hollywood shut down, right? You can't film a big scene with a dozen people, without masks on like this. But gaming kept on going because you can work from home and still produce these games. So Hollywood's pipeline shut down, yet these game companies kept on trucking, right? And obviously, with people stuck at home, they have Netflix and they have now games too.
And you mentioned some of the things like you need a new monitor, a new graphics card to play to the latest game. Give us a preview. What's like a piece of equipment that we haven't thought of that maybe in a year or two people are really going to need to play the next generation of games?
Yeah, so actually the key thing right now is the GPU, right? So games these days are shifting towards 4K. That means 4 times HD for display, right? And that requires more and more power to be processed through that. So that's a big thing. The problem is, with the rise of cryptocurrency, people buy these GPUs for mining. So it's a good news for both parties, right? For NVIDIA and AMD, which make these components, right, it's a big deal now because they have these two markets. For firms like TSMC, which makes the actual chips on order, big market because they have more and more orders. So in both ways, Taiwan wins.
So if you wanted to prepare for the next kind of wave of orders and maybe invest in those companies, you'd be looking at the GPU space, is what you're saying.
It's a big space. Now, of course, I don't give out investment advice on the air, nor should you, but it is a growing space, right? And of course, with that, you have different players like TSMC, for instance, and then from that, you have a long list of suppliers of components to that, right? For every GPU comes a bunch of transistors and other parts of that board.
Now, be honest, are you a gamer yourself?
A little bit here and there.
And what about esports? Again,
yes.
For people who aren't so familiar with this growing, I guess we should call it a sport. We should be fair.
Yes, for sure.
Is it going to increasingly replace physical sports, like from the audience perspective? Because now you could surf through the TV channels here in Taiwan, and there'll be competitions on TV, and
absolutely.
People take that really seriously now.
Or in Las Vegas, for instance, right? They have esports tournaments in the city, which are open to gamblers as well. So I don't think it will replace, so-called real sports. They're all real sports, but I mean football and hockey, that kind of stuff. But it will be a competitor for eyeball time, right? So with the NFL, for instance, the problem is their demographic, their viewers, are getting older and older and older, right? So eventually they will drop off. But with esports, you do have that young demographic. So if you want to invest in the future of entertainment, right, look to esports.
And for people who've never watched it, though, do they need to play these games before they can enjoy watching it as a spectator?
Well, I would think probably, right? You will be lost without knowing the game beforehand. But I think there is also a chance for casual viewers to join in, right? Because at the end of the day, you have on-screen action and also drama, right? You have, the grit, right? You have the effort to get to this point. And so it makes sense to focus on that story as well.
And where does Taiwan stand as a competitor? Is Taiwan producing a lot of global
absolutely.
Athletes and competitors?
Yeah. So if you look at the talent pool here, it's huge. Out in Nehu, they have esports stadiums where you can go watch the teams compete here. And they've done the U.S. circuit too, right? To all the big events in the U.S.
And are you going to be on one of these teams in the future?
I don't think so. It's not really for me. I'll happily observe and analyze the industry from afar.
You mentioned a few minutes ago when we were talking about payments.
Yes.
Sort of the importance of being able to facilitate payments now, especially with work from home. People don't want to do face-to-face services. So what does Taiwan do well with fintech? We could talk about what it does poorly too.
Yeah,
but let's talk about what it does well.
What it does well is, I guess, there is an ecosystem of venture capitalist dollars in the country that does allow for growth, right? So you have both support from the Taipei city government, right? They do have incubators, as well as VCs in the country for that. So one example, actually, of a good fintech innovator here is MyCoin. So MyCoin's a local crypto exchange. It's fully compliant with local laws and also then linked into the banking system. So if I want to buy Bitcoin, I can transfer that to an account at MyCoin and have that credited. Or I can buy it at 7-Eleven, so on and so forth.
What does Taiwan not do well in the fintech space? And not necessarily from the corporate perspective, because if we go ask some banks, they'll probably tell us we have a nice app to help our customers do some banking using their phones. But maybe from the consumer perspective, what does Taiwan not do so well in the fintech space?
Well, I think the issue with fintech here is regulators are quite conservative, right? So most people don't start their day thinking about the FSC and what it does and does not do, right? But they still have access to apps and services that are a bit far behind in the US just because because of the conservative hand they have there, right? So, for instance, any kind of peer-to-peer payments is far behind peers in the U.S. So Venmo, for instance, or PayPal. PayPal operates in Taiwan, of course, but it's quite restricted in comparison.
What about this regulatory sandbox that was enacted into law a few years ago, the Financial Technology Development and Innovative Experimentation Act?
Yes.
From 2018, it had this regulatory sandbox.
The name is a real mouthful, right?
Yeah.
So one thing we can focus on with that is what's called STOs, right? So STOs are a way to raise capital through tokens on the blockchain, right? So if you have a company, right, you can issue tokens for that, and I can have equity in there. So about 4 years ago, there was a huge boom of this online. Of course, it was the Wild West. No regulations, nothing like that, right? And everyone lost money. But around the world, regulators, including here in Taiwan, started to say, why don't we rein this in? Let's create a sandbox, some rules to try and experiment and see if we can actually make this work. So they did that in Taiwan. The problem is, however, that the actual amount you can raise with this STO law is quite low, right? So it's not enough to be useful. So the problem is, first of all, it's closed off to normal people. You have to be accredited, so having a large net worth. Secondly, the amount you can actually raise is not even enough for a seed round.
Okay, well, we're going to take a short break, but when we come back, we'll talk a bit more about fintech, and then we'll talk about digital assets, and we won't give out any investment advice, but we will talk about what all this means for working from home and Taiwan's economy. You're listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station.
如有长照服务需求、长照特别扣除额问题，请拨打1966长照专线，5分钟内通话免付费。一通电话让长期照顾管理专员协助申请长期照顾服务及解答长期照顾特别扣除额相关问题。以上内容由台北市政府卫生局提供。
不开车，黄色嘟嘟安全多，应酬喝酒不过量，安全回家最上道。爸爸要平安回家哦。
喝酒不开车，开车不喝酒哦。让我们一起尊重生命，拥抱亲情。
亲爱的民众，
提醒您定期清除排油烟机内部油垢。烹煮食物时，切忌分心做其他事情，并注意人离火熄。且厨房附近应设置灭火器，操作时保持适当距离。当厨房火灾时，严禁以水灭火。油锅起火也千万不要移动油锅，以免翻覆造成火势扩大延烧。以上内容由台北市政府消防局提供。
亲爱的朋友，您还在吸烟吗？快拿着健保卡到戒烟门诊，或拨打戒烟专线0800636363。提醒您，最近兴起的电子烟、加热烟，因为没有浓浓的烟臭味，就被认为无害。其实已经证实，新兴烟品都有二手烟及三手烟的危害，甚至还有爆炸的风险。我是义工蔡依林，所有烟品都 get out。我拒烟，我骄傲。
大家好，我是防疫车队的司机汪佑廷，我是一位专业的驾驶，在防疫期间负责将入境台湾的旅客平安送往检疫地点。作为防疫车队的驾驶，必须接受完整的防疫教育训练，确实做好个人防护措施，定时消毒车内环境，保护旅客及自己的健康。接种公费 COVID-19 疫苗后，不仅让我更安心执行每一次接送任务，也让家人更放心支持我的工作。
有政府，请安心。资讯由疾管署提供。
大家好，我是防疫医师严嘉贤。如果您与 COVID-19 确诊个案曾有密切接触，请留在家中一人一室，戴口罩、勤洗手，勿与他人接触，等候卫生单位通知。如果您不是需居家隔离之密切接触者，请自我健康监测14天。若出现相关症状，请联系119卫生局或1922依指示就医或筛检。
有政府，请安心。以上广告由行政院与疾管署提供。
我是张丰毅医师。如果您家中有 COVID-19 确诊病患，请一人一室隔离。如果症状恶化，请立即联系119卫生局或1922。照顾患者时，请佩戴口罩及手套。接触后，请清洁双手及环境。照顾者也要注意自身健康。结束照顾后，应自最后一次接触日起居家隔离14天。
有政府，请安心。以上广告由行政院与疾管署提供。
家己电台吼，家己主持咧。大家好，我是郭文铁，我伫台北广播电台。
谁当家？
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 你当家？
谁当家？
谁当家？谁当家？
谁当家？我当家。你当家？我当家。
我当家。
到底谁当家？你来当家。
Welcome back to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Our guest today, Sam Reynolds from Blockworks, an expert on digital assets, hardware industry, the gaming industry as well, esports.
A real polymath, I would say.
all within the technology space. Mm-hmm. So yeah, not the old economy. So you're definitely not an old economy kind of guy. Before the break, we were talking about fintech and some of the good things and some of the challenges here in Taiwan. Are there some fintech apps that you've used or observed in your travel around the world that are not here in Taiwan yet, or that you really like, that you would love to see here in Taiwan?
Yeah, sure. So Venmo's a good option for that, right? So I was in New York in 2019 and out for dinner with some friends there. The bill came, right? One person scanned the bill with their phone, and then it was scanned in, so they owed, say, $200. Then they could assign to the contacts, oh, you had the steak, you had the burger, you had the pizza, we can assign who had what, they can pay him, the bill settled, right? So I found that to be a very impressive, very modern example of fintech and how that really applies to everyday life, right? So the fintech industry loves their buzzwords, loves their grand ideas, but Venmo and that feature is a great example of how it really improves the retail consumer's life.
You think it'll be here in Taiwan, or like the experience of PayPal and all the challenges it had?
Yeah, so Venmo is actually owned by PayPal. However, right, I just see that as a very conservative market. It's tough to launch apps like that without a local partner. Now, it could be that a local bank here is their partner down the road, which would be great. But without that support locally, it'll be a tough bargain.
Let's talk a bit about digital assets
Sure.
and cryptocurrencies and your work with Blockworks. You cover this for the region, for Asia. Why are these digital assets and cryptocurrencies popular in Asia with not just investors or people who are hoping to make some money, but as a form of payment?
Sure.
Why is it popular in Asia?
Definitely. So the most popular form right now for payment is what's called stable coins. So stable coins are tokens that are tied to the US dollar's value. There's also other ones for other currencies, but primarily US dollar. So if you want to pay for something in China, right, and don't want to deal with a SWIFT wire or deal with capital controls, you use a stable coin. So if you're a vendor in China dealing every day with orders of 50K, 100K, so on and so forth, you can use stable coins, pay your clients in the US, in EU, whomever, right, and not worry about capital controls for that. Secondly, you can then convert that into RMB locally at a better rate than the US dollar.
What about at the retail level? Why are these things popular in Asia?
Right. So,
I mean, for example, you used the Venmo example from the U.S. of just people dividing up a bill in a restaurant. So, I mean, what if I owe you money here in Asia? Why is it popular nowadays for me to reimburse you using digital assets?
Well, I wouldn't actually say that primarily, right? So for retail users, crypto does not make a good form of payment. About 5 years ago, lots of companies tried to have payment processing applications which accept crypto as a form of payment. Didn't work. Quite famously, Elon Musk said in February that Tesla would accept Bitcoin for payment, and then last month he canceled that. So the issue is actually when you sell crypto in most jurisdictions, you have a capital gains tax attached to that. So if you want to buy a Tesla for, say, $40,000, right, and you sell that crypto, you then owe capital gains on said crypto. So it's not really efficient. So people here in Asia enjoy more of the trade rather than the payment experience. So, around the region, if you look at a place like Malaysia or some other areas, you don't see very mature capital markets, right? The stock market in Kuala Lumpur is not Singapore. Right. However, you do see a very active crypto industry there because people enjoy trading something. They can't trade stocks. So why not trade crypto and Bitcoin and DeFi and stuff like that?
How would you describe the knowledge level of the people who are doing that around Asia? Do they really understand the mining aspect and the creation of the digital assets or the cryptocurrencies, or are they just watching something that goes up and down and they think it's just like a traditional currency trading speculation or like a stock trading speculation?
Well, I would say actually that Asia is the natural home of lots of crypto trades for a few reasons. First of all, in most countries here, no capital gains tax on crypto. Secondly, right, just the love of having high returns is a huge thing. So there's a new part of crypto called DeFi, where you can have trading on not, say, Coinbase or MyCoin, but decentralized exchanges, right? So that allows you to lend capital to traders at a huge interest rate and have some very dynamic trades. So I think the excitement of that is pretty big here, right? And secondly, the technology as well, right? People do appreciate the protocols, and you do have lots of teams around the region, right, developing new protocols. Korea, for instance, they have lots of companies there, some of which have gotten pretty big investment from the likes of Morgan Stanley, developing exchanges, protocols, all that kind of fun stuff.
Almost sounds like our conversation earlier about esports, that this is all just kind of a game and a lot of people are just jumping in.
Well, I mean, it's a game, but you do have returns, right? I mean, there is some merit there as well, right? So you do allow everyone to be a big trader, and they have capital access that normally you have to be a pretty big fund to get to. And for the most part, they have made some pretty big returns on that, right? So even if you are actually a retail trader, not really into advanced trading, but do have some crypto, you can put that into an account and save it and get paid 10%. And get exposure to that industry without having that advanced knowledge. Now, in contrast, you save your hard-earned NT here, right? You might get 0.1%.
Well, are there other types of assets or trades that people are participating in? You mentioned not just buying the coin and watching it go go up because the market has been hot. You mentioned lending is one form. Are there other forms that people in Asia participate or here in Taiwan participate?
Yeah, so Ethereum is a very popular cryptocurrency, right? And as they move to a new version, they require you to what's called stake your current Ethereum tokens, right? So that more or less is putting these tokens into a platform similar to a bond, for instance, right? So you agree to stake these tokens, which helps the network expand for 2 years, and you're paid interest on that, just like a bond, right? So that's one thing. The other topic that's pretty big is the rise of digital assets that aren't cryptocurrencies. So you have things like tokenized gold, tokenized oil, tokenized lumber. So you can have a portfolio that's counterbalanced by tokenized oil, right? Or on, say, FTX or Binance, now you can trade futures. So with FTX, which is a big exchange in Hong Kong, you can trade futures on oil with your crypto assets. It's a very exciting platform and very exciting industry.
But we also hear sometimes or read sometimes about exchanges that run into problems, and then people have trouble accessing their assets. Is that a problem that people in Taiwan should be paying attention to?
Of course, right? So when you are involved in crypto, you have to do your own due diligence, but then times 10, right? So there was a very famous case actually from Vancouver, my hometown, of an exchange called Quadriga CX. And the long of the short of it is they had some trouble internally with their banking partners, and they were short capital. And this was coming, and people could not withdraw money, they couldn't withdraw their crypto, so on and so forth. And eventually, the CEO and founder, he died, allegedly, on a trip to India of Crohn's disease at the age of 33, 35, whatever it is. So that episode, however, really shook out the bad actors in the sector. So with the top exchanges like Binance, FTX, Coinbase is public in the US, you don't have that same risk, right? There are occasionally hacks, but they have insurance, right? There are issues with technology, right? Last week, during a time of high market activity, some went down, right? You couldn't access them, right? So there are hiccups, but the catastrophe of losing all of your Bitcoin, right, to a shady exchange is not really something that happens that much anymore.
What about the regulators in Taiwan? We talked a little bit earlier about the sandbox and some positive things that they've done. But generally speaking, what's the approach of Taiwan's regulators towards digital assets?
Well, a combination, this might sound weird, of both laissez-faire and conservative, right? So as far as things like KYC, AML go, the FSC put forward new laws about that this week, which require enhanced KYC, right? Now that is fine. KYC means your customer, right? It's fine to attach your ID to a wallet, right? That stops bad actors from getting involved and trying to cash out illicit gains, so on and so forth, right? But one other key aspect is taxation, right? So in Taiwan, there isn't really clear guidance about taxation. So of course, if you are MyCoin and you sell crypto and you have a fee involved in that, that's definitely taxable. But capital gains is not exactly clear cut. Now in the US, you do have capital gains on everything from equities to crypto. But in Taiwan, right, equities is a different story, but the crypto capital gains is not really that clear, right? So this could be a good thing, so it's not taxable, or a bad thing, you might owe taxes later.
Well, that would be a bad thing if you
yes, absolutely.
get a bill later. Notwithstanding that, what do you see as some potential areas of growth in the digital asset space here in Taiwan? Everything from supplying equipment to actually being a place where people will trade and where companies could base themselves. What's the growth areas for Taiwan?
Yeah, so the first growth area, of course, is supplying equipment. So firms like TSMC supply the processors that allow you to mine Bitcoin. So they have GPUs used to mine Ethereum, and also then specialized chips that are made to design Bitcoin for these miners, made with TSMC. But I do think one new growth area could be these crypto accounts for savings, right? Because people here are excellent savers, as we all know, right? But their returns are at best marginal, right? So if the FSC would allow firms like BlockFi or other kinds of US-based, very established companies to start to allow people here to get on board and save their crypto or stable coins, that will take off, right? And it's always good to have competition in the market, right? Banks, for instance, need competition, and having this new vehicle for savings that pays great interest would be a huge hit here.
When Hong Kong had its unrest in 2019, there was a lot of talk about financial institutions relocating staff to Singapore, but potentially Taiwan as well. Or would high net worth individuals want to relocate their assets or the management of their assets, not only to Singapore, but maybe to Taipei as well? From the digital assets world perspective, did you see a lot of that? I mean, do people want to sit here in Taiwan and manage their assets?
Well, no, because for a few reasons. First of all, the tax rate. I'm sure that anyone with a high net worth in Hong Kong looked at Taiwan's tax rate and said, no, thank you. Secondly, the other part is that the infrastructure around the law and other kinds of legal aspects isn't well developed here in Taiwan. So things like a family office, for instance, right? They might just invest in real estate here, right? Because the laws around that investment vehicle aren't well developed, right? So unfortunately, you do have this missed opportunity here of not being able to capture that capital exodus from Hong Kong, right? So it's not clear if there was an exodus in the first place, right? It's mid-tier, but Singapore has been the place to go to from Hong Kong for that. Unfortunately, in Taiwan's case, they haven't really captured those dollars leaving the territory.
But we've also read a lot of stories in the last 18 months because of the COVID situation of tech industry people coming to Taiwan, leaving Silicon Valley, for example, and coming to the safety of Taiwan. What are those people looking at when they come to live in Taipei? What kind of jobs or what kind of investments are they looking at?
Well, great question. So with this gold card diaspora heading here from California, they mostly were remote working, right? So in the US, firms there are quite comfortable with remote work. As long as the jobs get done, you're fine, right? So yes, different time zone here, but if you can do a call at 11 o'clock at night, that's fine, right? So some of them, of course, were working at established tech companies in Taiwan, but most were actually doing remote work. So as a beneficiary, it's not clear if Taiwan really captured that.
Do you think that'll change in the future, though? Not just we have the current problems in Taiwan with COVID, but as the world returns to normal, are people going to still think of Taipei as a place to come to live and work?
Well, let's see what happens in the next few months, right? So given the response, so this summer will be quite challenging with blackouts and no water, so that's an issue. But secondly, the workplace culture here is quite toxic, right? So if bosses can reverse course and allow for more remote work, allow for people to take time off for childcare and raise wages, yeah, sure. I mean, Taipei has potential in theory to become a hub for talent like Singapore or Hong Kong. But the issue is the workplace culture does not allow for stuff like that, which is deterrent for the world's best talent.
You don't sound so optimistic there.
Well, I mean, Taiwan had a real reversal in the last few weeks, right, with COVID's outbreak from complacency as well as the issue of power and no water. It is a tricky time for Taiwan. Let's see what happens in the weeks afterwards.
Yeah, and within the last few days, there's been some positive news on vaccines arriving here in Taiwan. And if I may say, you've had some experience with the vaccines as well.
That's correct. So in April, they opened up vaccinations to those going abroad. So I'm going abroad to the U.S. This summer to go to conferences because that happens now, right? We're back to normal in the U.S. And I got the first dose of the vaccine. Overall, handled fairly well, I think, right? I was probably the first 50 people to get it, so there were a few bugs, but overall handled quite well, right?
And what about the logistics of it, though? What does Taiwan need to do, and could it do it more digitally, as far as facilitating the rollout?
Yes. So the problem is you have to go hunt down these vaccines, right? There's not really a centralized place to go and find a vaccine near you. I had to go look through different hospital pages, right? So they opened the gates for this, I believe at like 9 o'clock one Monday. I was on at 9:30, and in Taipei, it was pretty much already sold out. I had to trek out to Keelung to get the vaccine there, but I had to use a very archaic site to do that, right?
Yeah.
So I think a centralized website that's a portal to go find vaccines near you, right, would be a lot better than this kind of ad hoc system we have right now.
Or maybe an app.
Or maybe an app, who knows, yeah.
Sam, we're almost out of time, but very quickly, could you tell us where people could go to read more about the blockchain or digital assets, cryptocurrencies, the things you write about? What's a website?
Well, certainly. So
the
site to go to first and foremost is blockworks.co, the logo that's right there. And also you can look at CoinDesk and other kinds of great sites like that.
Okay, great. Our guest today has been tech industry expert and now a work from home expert, because the tech and the work from home have come together here in Taipei, unfortunately. Sam Reynolds. Sam, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks so much, Ross.
You've been listening to Residence Messenger on Taipei Broadcasting Station. Have a good weekend.